What's up, guys? Welcome to Nutmegged. We're back. This is the podcast where a Yank and a Brit talk about the beautiful game from across the pond. I'm Faisal, representing, of course, the UK, currently based in Dubai now, which we'll get into in a second. And, of course, we've got Andrew holding it up in the US. How are you today, bud?
Life is good, my man. I'm stoked to be back. We kind of took a little hiatus for our two life changes that we're both going through, which is pretty crazy and exciting things, which we can chat about. But I'm so stoked to be back and finally talking about nutmegged soccer things.
It's time. We're back, and lots been happening in the world of football as well. It is all coming to an end as well. The league's coming to the end. We're coming to a really great time in the Champions League, which we'll get into as well. Clubs are going to be promoted. Clubs are getting relegated. So it's getting to that real kind of final confirmation part of the end of the season. Certain teams have already been relegated. Certain teams have already been out of the top four, which we'll get into. Of course, Manchester United is something that we need to talk about as well. There's also some great football being played by the Columbus Crew in the US, so we want to get into that as well. It's close to the heart, of course. So let's start off with the creme de la creme of European football. We're now in the semi-finals of what most people would argue is the best football tournament in the world football. It's got the best players. Manchester United aren't in there, so it hasn't got the best teams. But jokes aside, obviously it's got some of the biggest clubs. And we're currently in the semi-finals. So Andrew, you want to just start off with who we got in the semi-finals and what's the current state of play at the moment?
Absolutely. The Champions League should be exciting because the four teams that are currently in these semifinals are all in decent form, enough so that they can really cause a problem for any of the other teams. So that's exciting. So our semifinal looks like this. We have PSG versus Dortmund. That's an exciting matchup. And then our other side of the coin, we have Real Madrid, of course, versus Bayern. So two German teams holding down the fort. We have a PSG team, of course, coming from France, and Real Madrid coming from Spain. So no Premier League representation in these final four teams. But just to look at each team real quick, we've got PSG. They beat Barcelona to get here in a two-leg matchup that kind of went a bit back and forth. But PSG, with their front three and these young players that they have, are looking quite dangerous. We'll talk about our favorites after we run through this really quickly, but they might be in that conversation for my favorite team to actually win it all just because of the form that they're in. Dortmund also kind of scraping through. They ended up beating Atletico, just happened to have a good run of form and are competing well in the Champions League this year to get to where they are. I do think they'll have a tough matchup going against a PSG in the form that they're in. But if Dortmund show the form that have gotten them here, they can bring that to PSG. Maybe PSG has an off day, but I would pick PSG out of those two in that matchup. Then we have our other heavy hitter matchup, which you could flip a coin. Who knows who's going to win this one? Real Madrid, they won against City in penalties. If you've not watched the highlights, some awesome goalkeeping in that, and it was a super exciting time, especially to see City lose because I hate them. Then they are taking on Bayern Munich, not necessarily in the best form, but they just have such good players that they're always in the conversation to be good, and they ended up beating Arsenal to get here. So some of those Premier League teams almost making it to this top four, but just not doing enough to get through. So that's what it currently looks like. How are you feeling?
Yeah, it's the Man City loss was a bit of a shocker for me. I kind of had them pinned down for the final comfortably. That would have obviously helped also the Premier League's coefficient. So if Man City or like a UK club within Arsenal, for example, a British club, had actually made it to the semi-finals and the finals, we would have got an additional place within so we had essentially 5 teams going to the Champions League, which we maybe would have been fighting for potentially. On reflection, probably not, but that's an interesting one. I actually was really impressed by Barcelona, if I'm honest. I did not think they would play as well. They did play. Performances, they kind of put up the goals they scored. It was actually a very, very good game, both sides. The run they've had, granted, Real Madrid are quite ahead in terms of the La Liga, but it felt a bit more like the old Barcelona of old, essentially. So some good teams unfortunately missed out. Arsenal, again, having a great league, but I felt like perhaps they could have formed a little bit better in the Champions League. And there was definitely moments where, you've got to look at the teams, look at the players they have in that squad, they should the season they have, they should potentially be in that semi-final. But the teams have come out good now. It makes sense now. Dortmund again, great form, and Bayern Munich, of course, mixed bag. But again, getting to that point where this is it for them. Real Madrid, obviously, nothing needs to be said about that. And then, of course, you've got PSG again, which probably should be an interesting one for them to be in the final as well. With those four teams, so you've got your PSG, your Real Madrid, you've got, of course, Bayern Munich, and also Borussia Dortmund. What are you thinking? Who's your money on at the moment?
So of these four matchups, I think it's going to be PSG and Real Madrid making it through to the final. And if that does happen, I'm going to be very excited because I think that matchup is just going to be so enthralling to watch. The form that PSG is in, their front line, and the younger players that they have in that are just so explosive, so you never really know what's going to happen. Then on the flip side of that, Real Madrid always shows up in any final, as well as the Champions League to boot. So I think that will just be such an exciting matchup to watch them. But if I'm going to put money on anybody, I mean, it has to be on Real Madrid. If they make it to the final, like, who's going to bet against them? Because they just always seem to win the Champions League. So I will select out of PSG and Real Madrid. Of those two that make to the final, I'm taking Real Madrid as the victor.
No, I'm with you. I think what was the score, and Bayern Munich were great yesterday. Some of the goals, you didn't watch those highlights. There's the Sane goal in particular. Maybe the keeper could have done better, but I think the way it felt very much like he's got the ball, takes on the defender, and just lashes it into the bottom corner. It's actually such a great goal. It's quite satisfying to watch as well. Sometimes you always see on the football pitch, as a kid, you're playing football, you want to score a goal like that where you've just kind of pulled it and just snatched at it and just scored. So great goal from that perspective. I unfortunately will kind of write them off as well. I agree with you. I think Bernabeu, Real Madrid, basically at 0-0 equivalent. It's all for the taking. And, when you've got the Real Madrid flowing, like I said, a club of that level flowing at home, it's going to be comfortable for them. I'm with you on that side. And I think Dortmund have kind of found themselves a little bit in the Champions League, where they have the correct form, whether they have the actual ability to beat PSG, I don't think so. So I'm with you. I think it'll be PSG, Real Madrid, and then it's going to be a Real Madrid. I think it'll be a very interesting game. I think PSG will definitely push them. I don't think it'll be any kind of walk off from Real Madrid. But when you got Jude Bellingham in the form he's in, I mean, it would be crazy to see him lift the Champions League. As an English football fan, the way Jude Bellingham's performing, it's a pleasure to see and a pleasure, and you can only be proud of a person, a football player from the UK, but also from like the Midlands and Stourbridge, which is fantastic. So, really great to see. So, Real Madrid have got to take this surely.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what happens in the final. It'll be good to watch regardless. But we talked about two German teams in that. Unfortunately, my perspective, both of them are falling out. However, there is one German team that I kind of wish was in this mix for the Champions League because they are playing some stellar football. Of course, I'm talking about Leverkusen. They have smacked the Bundesliga this year, took it by storm, have already secured it. They have won. Congratulations. It's the first time in their history of winning the Bundesliga. So that's exciting. It's almost like Leicester City vibes in the Premier League a few years back. So that's so exciting. They have the young coach, Xabi Alonso, in there making his kind of managerial debut on the big stage. That's exciting for him. So a lot of good stuff happening for Leverkusen right now. And that 46-game unbeaten streak, new record in the top 5 leagues. So a lot of good stuff happening for those boys. Talk to me about this German side.
Well, Bayern Leverkusen, I think that's what we're going to call them, right? Like already wrapping up the Bundesliga, which is fantastic, great performances. But does that say a little bit about maybe the quality of Bayern Munich? Could Bayern Munich maybe push them a little bit? Or does that say more about Bayern Leverkusen? That's another question itself. But for me as well, like I said, the fact they're on for the treble at the moment, we were saying earlier, it probably isn't the official treble. So, you're having a domestic cup, winning your league, and also perhaps the Champions League is the official, I would say, Champions League. But obviously they've got Roma in the Europa League, which would be interesting. That's not an easy game, right? Let's be clear. Like, Roma are a solid team, doing well in Serie A, and when it comes to cup competitions, anything can happen, right? So it feels very much that they've definitely got a chance within the Europa League. And then obviously they've got a kind of a cup as well. I think it's the Polka Cup of sorts. They're against a team which is, I think, the league below them. which is, you would argue, a comfortable win, but it would just be horrible luck to be the one game you lose on this streak you're on to be in a final. I mean, I want to speak that into existence, but that would just be awful to kind of see. But a great run of form. The players, what Xabi Alonso has done with that team is what other clubs can only think and even dream about creating. They've not got the best of best players, right? None of these players are like they're not like your Real Madrid Galacticos, for example. They're just players who are hardworking. He's built a system around them, and he's got them playing football and never giving up. So, just as a fact here, when talking about the never giving up in particular, they've scored 16 goals, 6 goals after the 90 minutes is gone. Now, that shows a different mentality. It shows a different mindset. It shows a group of players that are fighting, not just for the club, but also for the manager, and are scoring goals like the league depends on it. Like every single time, they are not letting go. And that says a lot for their team. It says a lot for their mindset, like I said. So it's a pleasure to watch, and it brings it back how football should be. It's not about the big name signings. It's not about all the money flowing through the team. It's about hardworking players scoring goals and never letting themselves lose, letting their club down at all. So it really is a pleasure to see. My question was on that as well. Do you think next season, essentially, is it this? This season, are they getting gutted out? And will we see the same by Leverkusen next season? Do we see them winning again? What are you thinking?
I don't know if I see them doing the exact same thing that they did this year, but before I dive into my answer on that one, the point that you said, they don't have the best players, but what they do have is a system and a manager that understands the value of role players, which I talk about all the dang time from a coaching perspective. You don't necessarily want to have a team stacked full of all-stars. You do want to have 3, maybe 4 of those all-stars on your team. But even if you don't have that many, you still have a couple of those solid players. Then you have those structured players that fill into spots of need where they can perform that specific duty very well. And Leverkusen has done a great job of filling those players in the right places, and Xabi Alonso has done an amazing job of managing that team, creating a structure and a system for them all to thrive in and to just be competitive all the time in every match. That's really what you want to do, and what you want to see. That's what we're not seeing from Manchester United right now, and part of my frustrations, which we can talk about in a little bit, but it just is reinforcing my point that having those role players in a good system will make you a good team no matter where you are. Now, when it does come to next year, if you would have asked me this question maybe 3 weeks ago before Xabi Alonso had his future ironed out, I probably would have said, I'm going to guess they're going to get pulled apart a little bit. Some of their core players are probably going to go to different places. I think that'll still happen regardless. But now that Xabi Alonso said he's going to stay for another year, I think that may try or force or influence the core of that team to stay maybe another year. And if that is the case, they can then bring in a few other pieces to replace some of those pieces that will inevitably leave and can still be quite competitive. I do think it'll be very difficult for them to repeat because Bayern Munich will say, okay, cool, this season has sucked. We know what we're doing. We need to restructure. If they can get their board in order and the organizational side on the club thing ironed out and situated and their manager thing kind of organized too, because Tuchel has been talked of leaving. It's just so much drama. I think if they can get rid of the drama, that will help clear a path for Bayern Munich to be more successful this next year and then to actually compete. I do think, though, Leverkusen with Alonso at the helm will still be competing for those top 3 spots in the Bundesliga, which I'm excited to see. Now, my question that I'm going to flip back to you really quickly is, so Alonso is staying another year. He's going to manage for at least 1 more year. So he said he thinks that this is the best place for him to develop. That's what he said. His name was thrown out there as Liverpool manager because we all know Klopp is leaving. So they need a new manager, which looks like they found it. But why do you think he's staying 1 more year? I have a hypothesis, but I want to know what you think.
It's an interesting question because when I first heard the news, I did think, this for me doesn't. This sounds weird because you would argue a manager of this level who's quite a young manager who's had a really good season, and you'd think that perhaps you're at your peak. Let's go to another club of this level, like your Liverpool, for example, another top level club, for example. There's questions about at one point going him to go to Bayern Munich, which would really suck for Bundesliga football, honestly, for German football in particular. But for me, maybe what I would say, and maybe I'm not in the mind of Xabi Alonso, but I would say I'd say he's probably an ambitious manager, and what he sees is he doesn't want to be considered perhaps like a one-trick pony. And what he wants to think about is from his side is this is a club. I haven't just built a team. I've built here a squad that is consistent and that's going to grow and get better. I'm not the sort of player. This isn't a flash in the pan. This isn't like a one-hit wonder situation. I'm going to show the Bundesliga and the rest of the league as well that I am good enough to take it to the point where maybe not win it, but maybe do top two potentially next season. But also on top of that as well, I'm getting to play and actually manage this club in the Champions League. So it's probably an opportunity for him to kind of show that, look, yes, we've won the Bundesliga. Yes, probably we've won 2 cups this season potentially. Let's go again. Let's try this again. Let's show everybody now that this isn't a one trick. We're not a one trick pony. We're going to work hard. We're going to take on other teams, and we'll keep continuing on. So that's what I would say. That's my kind of thought about it. I'm interested in what you're thinking.
My thought is twofold. I think the reason Xabi Alonso is going to stay at Leverkusen is because, one, he's talked to management and said, hey, I'd be open to staying another year, but I need a couple guarantees of maybe certain players that will stay, or a certain budget for bringing in new players, or maybe having more say as what players are brought in. I think that conversation was had, and he said, okay, cool. The things are in place that I would need to be successful next year. So that is a good incentive for him to stay. The other thing I think that influenced him to stay is that he could have a job anywhere. I think right now with what he has done, any club would at least take a flyer and try to shove him into that managerial spot to see what he could do, because it looks like he can take a team, create some good structure, and make them a strong team regardless of who they're playing and be competitive. So that second piece is, I think that he wants to be the next manager of Real Madrid. Now that wouldn't be possible this season because Ancelotti is still there. However, there have been talks of him moving on, maybe wanting to manage the Brazil national team, so much different things about Ancelotti's future. So it looks like he is probably going to be at the door next season, just naturally without any of this happening anyway. And I think Alonso wants to be the next manager of Real Madrid because I think he has had a good experience there previously as a player. So that is my hypothesis between the conversations he's had with Leverkusen, setting him up for success next season, and then the element of being the next manager at Real Madrid, because he's probably had those conversations like in back rooms of saying, hey, I'd like to manage there, but maybe it doesn't make sense right now. And then they tell him, hey, one more year, give us a year, maybe stay at Leverkusen, go somewhere where you can be there for a year, then you can come in and be the manager. I think that is what will happen.
I like that. That's actually really interesting thinking, the way of thinking about it, because like pretty much any manager would love to manage Real Madrid, and for him to be able to stay and get those guarantees makes total sense. Like, if they don't get the team, then he's got a really good chance next season. There's nothing stopping him. On that Real Madrid thing, and moving a little bit away from Bayer Leverkusen for 1 second as well, do you think, and this is beginning about, do you think managing Real Madrid is the easiest job in world football?
I don't know if I know what the easiest job in world football is. If I'm going to pick one, it's probably going to be managing a national team, just because you don't have to do as intensive managerial things.
Let's go for club football then. World football, you're right. I mean, it makes sense. So let's go for club football, as in like it's probably the easiest of any club to manage, I would argue.
I would say it's maybe in the conversation, but it probably depends on time frame, because there have been times where Real Madrid have not been in the best form, and there's so much intense pressure on you to be at the top all the time because you're a club of that stature like Real Madrid is. The fans, the management, everyone always demands that they're competing for the top trophies in the world. So I think if you come in a situation where Ancelotti's done a good job, he's more of a vibesy manager, people say, but I think he's really done a great job of managing the team appropriately. And if you do replace him after maybe a natural succession of him moving on to his next job without any sacking or anything, I think then taking over a dressing room with the nature that Carlos has created, I think is good. So I think whatever manager comes in now has a good situation on their hands. So it probably won't be the most difficult job. With that being said, though, things can change quickly in football in general. We know that. Just look at Barcelona with Xavi. I mean, he was going in. It sounded like he was the promised child. Everyone wanted him to be there. Everyone was excited. but he already then had said, oh, he's going to leave. Now maybe he's going to stay a little bit longer, but there's been so much drama of maybe Barcelona even want him out just because he hasn't been getting the results. So even though you come into a good situation, which it looks like the next manager for Real Madrid will, that doesn't mean it's going to necessarily stay that way. So I think right now it's probably one of the easier jobs just because the state of the club, but it can change pretty quick.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think the two things my thoughts were when I kind of posed that question was, number one, I feel like it's a club that any football player is going to want to go to. So you've basically got the pick of the players. There's not one player that doesn't play for Real Madrid. So it's kind of like you've got it on easy, right? You kind of can just talk to anybody and go, yeah, we'll take you. That's fine. Every player's dream is to play for Real Madrid. So that's number one. Number two, you've got the infrastructure there. Like, you've got the whole team around, like the financial side of stuff is still there. Like you've got the Galacticos, you've got what people are building. You'd argue that La Liga is a fairly easy league, right? There's real competition really is from your Barcelona, maybe Atletico, but again, they're not really on form at the moment. So you'd argue you're probably kind of guaranteed a league at least, right? There'll be some dips in form, but you stick at it during the end. You'll probably make it. So those are kind of my kind of main reason. And then you're really kind of just hunting down the Champions League, and because of your Champions League pedigree, you're kind of in that space where you're looking at minimum semi-final. At final, probably pretty much. Whether you win it or not, that's another question. But I just feel like if you put that in comparison to, say, Man City, yes, Pep Guardiola's got quite an easy squad in terms of like he's got great players, but that's a harder league, right? And there's clubs around building now, like your Arsenals, like your Liverpools, for example, which is a bit more competitive. So that was my kind of thing. I just felt like if I could manage any club and I wanted like an easier route, I would say Real Madrid. I'd pick easily Real Madrid comfortably.
I was trying to think as you were answering that, like what really would be the easiest job from a managerial perspective in club football. And some of the things you mentioned maybe make me think PSG, because the league, is quite easy. Some people are saying it's not even like a top 5 league anymore. So yeah, if you do have like the firepower, the finances, the little bit of legacy, I guess you could say, of PSG, or the clout that they have, like bringing in like some decent players, I think maybe that might be a little easier than Real Madrid, because I feel like there's less pressure on PSG, perhaps. Yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna have to think about that. Like, what is really the easiest job in world football for clubs? We'll have to have that as a conversation at some point. But now let's talk about one of the truly top 5 leagues, the Premier League. Let's take a glance over in that direction as we are nearing the end of the season already. Time certainly flies when you're having fun watching some beautiful soccer being played. So that being the case, do you want to talk us through what it looks like? I'll start us off really just quickly though with the relegation situation, because we already have one team that has secured relegation, unfortunately. That is Sheffield United. Not something that we were surprised by. We've seen their form all season. They're sitting on only 16 points, and they are already in a situation where they would not be able to even win out the rest of their games to get them out of that relegation zone. So we shed a tear for Sheffield United as they will be playing in the Championship. But then talking about our current relegation standings as well. So Sheffield, of course, the bottom. We have Burnley at 19 and Luton Town in 18. But it is a close battle for those remaining spots. So this will be an exciting race to the finish at the bottom of the table. So Burnley sitting on 24 points, Luton Town at 25, and then Nottingham Forest in 17th, the safe spot, the first safe option, at 26. So a really close battle there. But then when you go above Nottingham Forest, it's 35 with Brentford. So it looks like Brentford are pretty much going to be safe. So we're going to have to look at who that final safe spot goes to. It's really up for grabs. It'll be an exciting one to watch.
Yeah, I mean, this whole league this season has been really tough, just for all the teams, even at the bottom, even at the top as well, with the deductions that Everton have had, and of course, obviously Nottingham Forest. We're waiting for those charges to drop on Man City, and that will be a very explosive episode for both of us, because we're waiting for that. That is probably something we will chat about at some point, how they managed to go. There's probably a Netflix documentary in there somewhere about how they've managed to get away with what they've got away with. So interesting battle at the bottom. Near the top, I'm sure obviously our listeners know at the moment, it is even tighter at the top. It literally changes each week. You've got currently at the moment, so just bearing in mind there are certain clubs haven't played complete full set of games yet. So you've got 35 games played by Arsenal at the moment, and they're on 80 points. So the top of the league, it's tight by the top of the league by 1 point, 79 points. It's Man City, but they have played one game less. So there's one game in hand here. There's an opportunity for them to kind of leapfrog Arsenal in that space. And then you've got Liverpool, which are on 75, which, I mean, they're not completely out of it. You'd have to think Arsenal, Man City would have to have some disastrous run of form, but we can be pretty confident that Liverpool's kind of their opportunity to kind of get into that top space is kind of done. And then you get into the interesting part, which is really great news for Aston Villa fans in particular. And it's been great to see Aston Villa and Unai Emery really. That team has been fantastic to watch. Aston Villa currently on 67 points, and they played 35 games. So can you imagine an Aston Villa in the Champions League? I mean, that would be honestly fantastic. The likes of Aston Villa, by Leverkusen in that space now as well. And great against some really great top clubs as well. And then you get to a point where you've got 5th place, Spurs, 60 points. And then sitting in 6th, which didn't think I'd be saying at this time in the season, but with the bumpy run of form we've had, we'll take it. 6th place at the moment. Played 34 games, so we've got a game in hand, but not massively relevant in terms of where the league standings are. On 54 points is, of course, Manchester United. So it's top 6. I say top two are really looking tight, and it's going to be a quite interesting race. I think you've probably got your next spots. You got your Liverpool, Aston Villa probably confirmed, I would argue, for the Champions League. And then you kind of your Spurs. Your Spurs probably are in that space with Manchester United, but Manchester United officially as of their 1-1 draw with Burnley, which I watched, it was an awful game. Definitely should have lost that. Was actually meant that Manchester United are completely out of the top 4 race. Thoughts on, before we get into the Man United one, because we've got a lot of thoughts on that. Thoughts on winning the league? Who's your money on at the moment?
So at the very beginning and throughout episodes, I've been talking how Liverpool, I think we're going to pull it out. I think it's now a very slim chance of that happening, unfortunately. I really do think if the injuries had not hit them as hard as they did this season, they would have been at the top. And I continually say their structure is really the only one that can kind of compete with Manchester City in terms of depth and longevity. With that being said, Arsenal is doing a pretty good job of proving me wrong, and they are fighting for that top spot now. The run of form, though, from City is just disgusting. I don't know at this point of the season who is going to trip them up, because their last games are going to be fairly easy for Manchester City standard. Really, the only one I could see them potentially losing is the last game of the season against Tottenham, because Tottenham, they have glimpses of very competitive ability to win games here and there. That is really the only one that I could see them tripping up on. And even if they do, Arsenal's schedule is a little bit more difficult, and I could see them losing more games or drawing some games. So really do think City will pull this out. Unfortunately, I hate to say it, because I don't want City to win anything. I hate them. So I was hoping that they would be further down. I pegged them as 2nd in my estimated Premier League table. So that is just disappointing. I was also hoping Tottenham would get a little bit higher, but it is what it is. If I had to select my team right now to win, I would say it will be City, but I'm hoping Arsenal can pull off a miracle and find some form and keep that top spot locked down.
Yep, 100% with you. I think this is City. I mean, I think I pretty much backed City on this as well. I think I'm fairly confident the way City are playing, the way they play, the type of football they play, and like you said, the run of form at the moment. They've got players out, or players not really on the greatest run of form. They can bring out players and still they're scoring goals, right? Foden was out for one game. Haaland's been out for a game, scoring a goal. Like, there's just, the depth there is crazy. If you look at their run at the moment, they've got Wolves, they've got Fulham, they've got Spurs, and they end with West Ham United. So you're looking at that. There shouldn't be any losses in that space, really, and they actually can't afford any more losses in that space. But I think, maybe that West Ham game or in that Spurs game, like you said, is probably going to be the one that's going to trip them up a little bit. But if you look at the Arsenal run here, they've got Bournemouth, they've got us, Manchester United. Well, that's 3 points there. And then you've got Everton. So, you would argue there's probably 9 points sitting there for them. There's probably an easier run, I would argue, for them than Man City. There's a couple of banana skins in there for Man City with that Spurs game potentially, and also the West Ham game, maybe getting a draw off that one. But there's obviously 3 points there. So I'm with you. I think it's definitely probably going to be a City another league in the bank, really, which is very annoying. But when you've got a name structure like Man City do, when you've got players and a system like they do, there's not much getting in their way, really. So who are you thinking for that kind of so Man United officially out? So is it a case of Spurs and Villa fighting for that fourth spot, you think, or is it just Villa?
Yeah, I think it is probably set, actually, how the table looks right now, with Liverpool being at 75 and then Villa having 67. That's a pretty big gap to be able to jump unless something crazy happens. And then underneath the Villa is Tottenham. So with they having 60 points, I feel like that's a pretty big gap to jump as well for them. So it looks really pretty solidified for what I envision the end of the season looking like. I mean, Manchester United, I just don't have any faith, and the form guide doesn't show it either, that they could even try to make a run to get up to fifth spot. I would back Tottenham more than I would back Manchester United for sure.
I mean, while we're on this, and we've opened the can here a little bit, so as I said already, Manchester United out of the top four race. My question to you, and there's probably a lot of time for this, but what do you think has gone wrong this season? Just for context here, we're out of the top four race. There's an FA Cup final we have left against Man City, but it's against Man City. That's it. That's all we're running for this season. What went wrong, do you think?
There's so many things that went wrong, and I've been a proponent of keeping Erik ten Hag for a while, and I'm maybe not as much on that boat anymore, but I don't think really the problem stems from him. I do believe that there is just so much disorganization within the club, specifically like the back/front office. That is where everything stems for me, for all the issues that Manchester United has had. Now, sure, you'll have the Sancho issue. You'll have some of the other player drama that's happening, and maybe a different manager could have managed that better and fought through some of the adversity and disorganization that the club brings to the managerial spot. However, I don't think Ten Hag did that well enough, and I don't think bringing in another manager really would have made that much of an uptick anyway. The silver lining for me is that they're slowly starting to get more things structured and organized because Ratcliffe has come in and now is setting up some processes. And we all knew it was going to take a while, so we're not going to see an immediate bounce in points or direction for Manchester United because all of this takes so much time. And it's the same with any type of organization. If you have poor leadership and dysfunction at the top, that's just going to bleed down into every facet of that organization. And Manchester United is an organization, it's a company, just like any other business. And the leadership has been so poor and rotten for so long that it's just degraded any type of structure or system that Manchester United has had previously. So that being the case, that is the biggest issue for me. Again, the silver lining, Ratcliffe coming in and creating some structure. Now, Dan Ashworth as sporting director, he has a good resume. It looks like he knows what he's doing. We didn't even have a sporting director. I don't know if that's just because the Glazers didn't want to pay money to do that or didn't care enough to do that. But now that we have that, I feel like we're trending in the right direction with getting some smart people in good positions. And I think that will ultimately help shore up the club and then allow us to work down from there and saying, okay, we want to have this type of manager. We want to have this type of structure, actually looking for someone that makes sense to plug into the system. Then from there, after you have the right manager, then you can look down and say, okay, now we have this structure. This manager likes to have this style. Now we can start buying players that fit appropriately with that style instead of just splashing money on people that are exciting, that are fancy names like a Sancho or like a Mason Mount, just because you think, oh, they're going to be good someday, without any real plan of how to utilize them currently and get them where they need to be so that they can be better someday. So really, I could just talk about this forever because there's so many issues and it's so frustrating to see all the time. But start it at the top, get the structure in place. That will make everything better.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that the structure's there is now improving. But for me, I'm watching some of these performances and I'm seeing 11 players here who don't really have any identity or any system. And I think that really starts from Ten Hag, in my opinion. Like, as much as there's drama around the club, I feel like there's not been one game I've been like, wow, this is great football. It feels like it's 11 players that have decided to all come on the pitch together and just trying to kick a ball around. And there's definitely been times where I'm like, this team could comfortably be in a relegation battle at points. There's been some performances that have been truly awful. Some goalkeeping howlers, some massive defensive errors, and also the injuries. that's been a massive part of this as well. When you look at Luke Shaw, for example, there was a stat the other day that I read where he's only played in his, I think maybe how many 8 years potentially he's been at Manchester. He's only played 50% of those games in his like whole time. Like the rest of the time he's been injured. There's definitely an issue here where, for example, Mason Mount, I actually see him very, very rarely as a player. He's out for most of the season. There's definitely something that's going on here where I don't know whether it's what we're doing in training or something at a level. So for me, I think it's down to 2v1. I think it's number one. Unfortunately, I think I say pretty earlier, but for me, the Manchester United FA Cup against Coventry really for me really sealed me firmly in the Ten Hag out camp. I think this is it for me. I think what real was nail in the coffin for me was after that match when Manchester United performed awfully. We've taken Coventry City to penalties and we've let go a 3-0 lead. It is, you don't come out and say, yes, it was a good performance. We began the first half, we played well. You should have to talk to the camera and to be honest, say it was terrible. Right? Like there's no one should be, no, in my opinion, no Manchester United fan should be celebrating that victory in any capacity against a team that probably deserved it and probably would have been in their history when an incredible achievement. And Man United are just going to go in there and just lose to Man City. Like it is really frustrating to watch. So Ten Hag for me is the real culprit in this, and I think this is his time. And I think this is the end of the season for him to really check out here. To keep things moving, in my opinion. But not happy.
I agree. I do think Ten Hag is not the manager for this job. The problem for me, though, is we've seen it with players. We bring in good, talented players, but then there's this thing where once they're in, there's either some drama or they end up not performing well, and we just kind of beat their future into the ground. I feel like that same thing would happen with a manager that we would bring in. So if there's a manager, let's say a Xabi Alonso, we would convince him to be the next manager for Manchester United. Not going to happen ever. But if we somehow made that happen, I would still be weary that he wouldn't have a good time and be able to manage appropriately because the organization is just so in flux. There's no organization structure at all. So I would just be so hesitant to bring in any manager and say that they have the ability to fix it like they did with Ten Hag. I do like Ten Hag's style. He's a little bit more authoritarian, kind of like a similar way to Alex Ferguson was. And I enjoy that. And I think you have to have that like structure, especially when you're dealing with high profile players at a whole high profile club like Manchester United. But for me, yeah, I'm happy to say Ten Hag out. We need a new thing over there. We need a new manager. But at the same time, before we do that, I want to get that structure in place so we can at least set the manager up for success. But yeah, I have not seen anything special that really makes me hold tight to Ten Hag. I'm happy to send him to his next job and wish him well.
Well, I'll then start on my take it or leave it, which links into Manchester United. And I think, like I said, I'm interested to see what your thoughts on this is. But my take it or leave it is, and you know how I feel about Manchester United at the moment, I don't think personally anything will change next season. And my take it or leave it is Manchester United do not make top 4 next season either.
That's a good one. That's tough. I'm going to leave it and say they will not make the top 4 or take it, however that is. I don't think they're going to finish in the top 4. Yeah, I'm going to take it because I don't think they're going to make the top 4. There are just too many other good teams that are figuring out how to be successful without having a ton of stars. Like I keep saying, having those right players in the right positions. So you think about like Newcastle or West Ham or maybe Chelsea gets their stuff together. All of those teams not even in the top 5 conversation, but they could be next year if they do the right things in the off season. And then we look at the top of the table. I don't see Arsenal, Manchester City, Liverpool really going anywhere. And then maybe Tottenham can get a few things structured so that they can be a bit more competitive to try to get that 4 spot away from Villa. And then even just Villa probably going to bring back most of their players next year and maybe be just as competitive. I don't really see Manchester United being able to do enough to get up into that conversation. I do think, though, they'll start to be better and play a bit better next season because now those pieces, like that sporting director, are getting into place. It just takes time for the impact to be felt from those types of things. But yeah, we're not even close to where we need to be in terms of back and front office situations. So I think next season will be a little bit more of that growth period of saying, all right, we're getting the right people in the right places. So then toward the end of the season, I suspect that we'll start to see a little bit more fluidity and maybe glimpses of what that old Manchester United was like. But yeah, I don't think it's going to be an easy season next year either. What are you doing? You taking or leaving?
I'm 100%. I mean, I'm taking it for sure. When I asked that question, I was rhetorical in my opinion because I know when I'm making top four next season. I think I'm exactly the things you've just said right now. It just makes no sense for us to be around those other clubs who are performing so well, who are going to only get stronger and better. Like this Chelsea team is given next season, Pochettino is going to really make them work, and I think it'll be an interesting place. So, yeah, I'm 100% firmly in the take it account.
All right, let me throw you my take it or leave it. This one has to do with Jurgen Klopp. He is leaving. We know at the end of the season. We wish him well. We don't know what his plans are after this. He maybe doesn't even know either. So if Klopp wins a World Cup because he decides to go on and manage a World Cup national team competitor, if he does, let's say it's Germany, if he goes on to win a World Cup, do you think he will be remembered as a better manager if Guardiola retires at the end of this season with Manchester City? So does a World Cup mean more to you from a manager's perspective, the way you view them, or do you think the legacy that Guardiola has done now exceeds that?
I think for me, what Guardiola's done, nothing can surpass that. Even a World Cup in comparison to Klopp can do. I think for me, Pep Guardiola hasn't just bought a like his the accolades he's brought with him for Man City. He's brought a different identity to the Premier League. He's brought a different style of attacking to the Premier League, and not many managers can say and hold that accolade. Right? There's no two ways about that. What he's done with his Man City team, the way he's done for Champions League, the treble, for example, like it pains me, but for me, treble over World Cup, 100%. There's like, how hard it is to be in those competitions, to be against such a difficult Premier League and still win, to be against such a difficult Champions League and still win, and also pick up like a cup, which again is a domestic cup, but still against some essentially Premier League players. Like it's a tough league. It's one of the best leagues. And a World Cup, you can have a really good tournament and then fall off. Like a tournament is a very different to a Premier League. Requires stamina, it requires endurance, it requires players really week in, week out training. And the league is extremely hard. So I will 100% say that even if Klopp does win a World Cup, I think Pep Guardiola, that doesn't really affect. I think Pep Guardiola will still have a bigger legacy. However, the big caveat this really hinges on is these charges. And, if these charges come through, does that affect his legacy? Argue yes, because then there's obviously it's cheating, right? Let's be real. Some of the charges that are laid out, the money has been shifting around. You can't have that. That's not. I'm not having that at all. So yeah. So yes. So no. Klopp winning the World Cup does not affect Guardiola's legacy, and yeah, that's what I'll go with.
I think I'm going to take it. I think Klopp will be remembered as a better manager, at least in my perspective. I think the charges are a big thing. And like out of the over 100 charges, you telling me none of those are true? I don't know if I would end up believing that. And we know they do sketchy stuff with money. And like one of the higher ups at Manchester City then also came out in an interview a while back and said, we're just going to pump a bunch of lawyers into this situation so that we can kind of prevent it from happening or make it go away. Like, I don't love that stuff. They've not been very transparent about this whole situation. So I'm not a huge fan of that. And that kind of goes into the piece of where there's a caveat for Guardiola. He is essentially a manager with an unlimited budget because they have that Middle Eastern oil money. So they can really buy whoever they want, best training grounds. Literally, money is not an object. So that is how they become such a good team so quickly. With that being said, I know that Guardiola is a tactical mastermind and he is a phenomenal manager. And I think that he really would be a great manager for any team. But I think he would be at the same level as Klopp would be if he didn't have all of that money, because Klopp is also a phenomenal manager. So if I were to take them both and put them in some different type of team that doesn't have unlimited funding, I would love to watch that matchup because I think it would be so even. Now, I hate City just in general for some of the reasons I mentioned, but also because they are a rival of Manchester United and because Guardiola didn't end up high-fiving the 2013 MLS Manager of the Year in the final when he was managing Bayern Munich. I was just not a fan of how he handled himself in that situation. So a lot of things I do have some bias against City and Guardiola, but I think if Klopp is able to take over Germany, a side that is in disarray, bring them to a better situation and winning the World Cup, that would be so impressive. And then if I see Guardiola retire now, I just don't think he would have had the challenge of managing another team to be as successful as City was. So his other managerial feats, awesome. I know he's a great manager. That's not negotiable at all. We understand that. But I just to see him be better just because he happened to be the manager of a team that had so much money, that just makes me feel like it's almost like a little asterisk, like, in baseball. So there is a little asterisk that goes next to players that get into the Hall of Fame if they've used steroids or something of that nature. I don't even know the rule very well, but there's always like a little asterisk next to their name because they were found guilty of using steroids. I almost feel like there's a little asterisk there just because like he had unlimited money. So that of course makes your job a lot easier.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think for me, I'm just looking at it purely on what I think who's brought the most value to the Premier League. And I feel like Pep Guardiola from like a footballing perspective, but also from, I just don't know, if I'm comparing accolades, Pep Guardiola to Klopp accolades, I feel like winning the Premier League consistently and then perhaps getting a Premier League and a Champions League in comparison, it just feels like there's a bit of a mismatch. I feel I'm with you though. I think that asterisk would be a big asterisk. Let's be real, because it's not a good place for them.
If you took Guardiola and Klopp and swapped clubs, do you think the situation would be the same or not?
Situation in terms of.
So do you think City would still be winning all the time because Klopp is there and he just has a ton of money, or do you think Guardiola is such a better manager than Klopp that he would have ended up making Liverpool more competitive even with less money?
That's a really good point. I think that's a really tough one. Because for me, that if I see Pep Guardiola in that Liverpool team, I think Liverpool win 100% way more comfortably. I think I see them winning way more Premier League, winning way more Champions League. I feel what he does football. I mean, what he does with strategy, he would build that team up to be an absolute monster of a team. I would argue still. I feel like that, and I think Klopp, yes, he would do well. I think it would be very much like a Real Madrid thing where he's got the best players and like. Klopp's a good strategy, but like it just feels like for me, Pep Guardiola and Klopp are two very good managers, but very different managers with different club ethos. You can't. They're in the same bracket because they're managers, but at the end of the day, their approach to football and their strategy is very, very different. That management that Klopp has is probably very different to what Pep Guardiola has. Like there's a very different mindset, different tactics in terms of how they build their games up, and I feel like they've built their clubs around their systems, and I feel like Guardiola is a better system than Klopp's. Not to say they're both amazing managers, but I just think their system's a little bit better for Guardiola.
I would pay all the money I have to peek behind the curtain into the other dimension to see in the world where Klopp manages City and Guardiola manages Liverpool, to see if now in that universe Klopp is the one that's regarded as like the ultimate manager that's done so many amazing things because he's won everything with City. And then Guardiola is like, yeah, a great manager, but just not at that level. I'd love to see how the money just influences the ability of teams and then ultimately the managers that manage it. Who knows? We'll never see. I don't have enough money to build that type of machine. So it is what it is.
Let's move on to Columbus Crew. Let's do a bit before we get into the final nutmegs. I want to give you an opportunity to talk a bit more about Columbus Crew and talk us through that.
Yeah, absolutely. MLS season is underway. I know we don't talk about the MLS a whole lot on this podcast, but for good reasons, because I don't love the MLS myself, but I do love the Columbus Crew. They're my local team. They're the first team that I watched as a kid, and they are slapping, which is great. They had a phenomenal season last year, winning the entire thing, so that was wonderful. But this season, they've started off decently strong. Now, though, there is a cup competition that I want to talk about specifically that has made the Columbus Crew the talking point all around American soccer. That is because they are currently in the CONCACAF Champions Cup. It's kind of confusing. It's like a cup competition that is similar to the Champions League. It follows kind of that same structure overall, but it's between the teams in North America and Central America, which is ultimately kind of just all North America in general. So it's mostly Liga MX and MLS competing against one another to see which club out of those two leagues is the best. So what has happened now, though, the Columbus Crew are making a run. So they have beat Tigres, team in Mexico, usually one of the best, always a very competitive team in Liga MX. That is the first time an MLS team has ever won a knockout match in Mexico. in this competition. So first time that has ever happened where an MLS team has gone down away and won a knockout game, because the atmosphere in Mexico is just so insane and intense, which is awesome. We'd love to see that. But even when we're talking about U.S. men's national teams going down to play in Mexico in the Azteca, or any type of Central American type of team or atmosphere as well, it's always very difficult. So to see the Columbus Crew do that is awesome. It's the first time ever. I'm glad the Crew were the ones to do it, to break that record. So that makes me hope that they can make it to the final. And that is not only because of that situation, but because they have a 2-1 advantage going into the second leg against Monterrey. Monterrey, just like Tigres, is another powerhouse of a team in Mexico. To already get that result is amazing. It was on home turf, though. So that's what is going to make this difficult, because now they have to go to Monterrey and be able to defend that advantage that they do have to then make it to the final, which will be against Pachuca. So that will be the final, because they've already made it. Pachuca's there. They have gotten through. Congratulations to them. But now it's up to Monterrey or the Columbus Crew to be that final spot in the final for the CONCACAF Champions Cup. That game, actually, the Columbus Crew game versus Monterrey, happens today at around, I think, 10:15 p.m. here, Eastern Standard Time. So hopefully for the next episode, I'll have some good news about the Columbus Crew advancing to talk to you guys about.
Nice. It's always really interesting learning more about that side. Like I said, we don't talk about the MLS enough, but hearing that and hearing the excitement potentially around the Columbus Crew getting to that space, I think is fantastic. So we need to do, I think, if they do get through, or we probably need to break this down a bit further and learn more about that, because I think that's great, especially for our fans, more of our UK and European fans, to learn more about that side of it, because, sounds fantastic. Getting into the final part of this, let's close off with our Nutmegged of the week. I'll just kind of go through mine first, just so we can give you an opportunity to think about yours. But mine links back to Manchester United, and it adds to the annoyance I had after watching that game. Was Anthony? You probably know what I'm going to say here. Anthony cupping his ear to the commentary players when the last penalty we score goes in. I don't know what he's thinking. I don't know where he thinks he is, or whether he was watching that game and even considering what the performance was. But just really poor, very poorly timed, and a terrible, just not. It's not cool for commentary fans, for commentary players as well, to see that, especially the Manchester United level, to be doing that. So for me, it's a big nutmeg. Anthony, watch yourself, bud. It's not cool.
And on top of that, his form has not been great. So to do that in that type of situation against a lower tier team in a game you should be winning of Manchester United's caliber, yeah, it's just cringe. You just don't love to see that. So a lot of stuff not going Anthony's way. My nutmegged for you is actually MLS related of sorts. So Don Garber is the chairman of the MLS. He's like the figurehead of all of it. I don't love him. A lot of people don't love him, which it is what it is, but he is not wanting other leagues to play in the U.S. So I have to break this down a little bit because it can get kind of confusing. So FIFA is likely to allow teams to play official league matches abroad after a court case concludes. There's essentially a court case out there that's happening that is trying to tell FIFA that they are allowed to play sanctioned league games. So, for example, like a La Liga match between Real Madrid and Barcelona that counts for points in the league can be played abroad in another country to open up the market, bring in new fans, all that kind of jazz. So it looks like that will probably end up happening as like the NFL does. So the NFL plays games in London and in other places across the world. If that does happen, they asked Don Garber about that situation and what it would look like for MLS, because they're thinking the MLS won't want that to happen because the other leagues are already more popular. Then you're bringing in more leagues to actually play games that matter in the United States. That's going to draw more fans' attention away from the MLS. Of course, that makes sense. Don Garber essentially saying that is pretty much the case, that he's not a big fan with some of his comments. So here's a direct quote from our boy Don Garber. I really care a lot about those people that are investing in the game, doing the work, building the game for the next generation, investing in infrastructure and player development under the guidelines and requirements of our federation and confederation. The reason I say this comment from him is because two things. He is saying under the guidelines and requirements of the Federation and Confederation, that obviously means that he doesn't want them to change, because as long as that Confederation is saying you can't do external league games in other countries, that's just the rules. He wants, obviously, the rules to stay the same. Fine, whatever. I mean, it makes sense for him to not want to drag MLS fans away to look at something else. The contradictory statement he made before, though, caring about the actual game, investing in it, growing in it, he does not care at all, because he has been a part of the weird conglomerate organization that heads up the United States Soccer Confederation, and he has prevented so many things from happening and only trying to funnel them into the MLS network. So like youth development doesn't really happen for US soccer anymore. It's mostly into the MLS academies, which everything was shoved down into the MLS, which is a monopoly, and doesn't make sense because it doesn't allow clubs like Dilla Rising or other larger clubs to develop players appropriately. There's no pathway. If the pyramid was opened up in the United States, which it's supposed to be underneath of FIFA's guidelines, but it's not. So that's a contradictory statement. It would allow so many more players to move, to develop, to get more experience. So all of this just doesn't make sense. We know Don Garber wasn't going to be about it, so don't even fake and try to say you're about it. So that is, for me, my nutmeg of the week.
It is a shambles, isn't it, really? Like I said, a person on that level saying things like that, when you want your clubs to do best. It works for you as an organization. It makes sense to bring in players, to bring in that environment, create that environment to succeed in terms of the MLS. To not do that, it just seems, it's kicking yourself in the face, really.
It's just a nightmare.
Not good. Let's close this episode. It's been great speaking to you as always, bud. It's been a lot to discuss. We covered a lot of really interesting stuff, so looking forward to catching up again, and of course learning more about some of these, what's happening in the Champions League, what's going to happen in the Premier League. We're looking forward to it. Lots of exciting stuff on the horizon. Hopefully we'll see you guys soon. Final words, Andrew?
Final note, actually, also, I want to hear from you too, just like a quick life update for all of our followers, because we took a little break so that we could get our lives sorted over here. So like, I am now the new head coach of Terra State soccer team. So I am coaching our men's team here, and it's been a fun new learning process. So I've been here for about 2 months now, trying to get recruits in and building up the soccer program. So that's been a new exciting challenge, but I know you have moved somewhat across the world. So tell us about your next adventure.
So as at the top of the show, I am currently now in Dubai. So moved from Dubai in January. We wanted a new adventure. We've been in the UK obviously forever, and we always wanted to live abroad for a period of time. So we risked it all, went out to Dubai, and I'm very, very happy to say I've got a job out here as well, which is fantastic. So really great. We've just moved into our new flat, which is fantastic. So really loving it at the moment. New environment, new adventure, new challenge. But really excited to be out here in Dubai. But obviously still reporting in UK football because, that's our true love.
But that's just to say, Nutmegged is back, baby.
Have a great afternoon, evening, wherever you are. And hopefully we see you guys soon. Enjoy.
Peace.